It's Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer and cannibal.
In what appears to be a psychopathic mass murder.
I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism.
On the night of July 22, 1991, Milwaukee, Wisconsin seemed calm, like any other summer evening. Within hours, the entire nation would be shaken by a discovery so horrifying it would forever change the way America looked at evil. It began with a man running through the streets, terrified. Tracy Edwards, with handcuffs dangling from his wrist, flagged down a police car and begged the officers to follow him. He pointed them toward the Oxford Apartments, to unit number 213. It was the place he had just escaped. When the officers pushed open the door, a wave of stench hit them. The smell of death mixed with chemicals. At first, they thought they had stumbled into a filthy, abandoned apartment. But when their flashlights cut through the dark, the truth emerged. Inside the refrigerator were human heads. In the freezer were bags of dismembered flesh. On the floor lay acid, saws, knives, and jars of preserved body parts. Standing calmly in the middle of the chaos was Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. He looked quiet, almost polite as he was handcuffed. But within minutes, the world would know him by the name that sent chills through America. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal who terrified America. What shocked people was not only the number of victims. 17 lives were taken across 13 years. The horror was also in the way he did it. Dahmer did not only kill. He photographed his victims after death. He preserved their remains. He even consumed their flesh. The case struck at America's deepest fear. A monster could be living right next door. A neighbor who looked ordinary. A man who said hello in the hallway. A face no one suspected until it was too late. Even more chilling was this. Police had chances to stop him. One teenager escaped, drugged and bleeding, only to be returned to Dahmer by officers who believed his lies. Hours later, the boy was dead. That mistake became one of the most haunting failures in modern policing. From that night forward, nothing in Milwaukee and nothing in America felt the same. People asked, how could Dahmer operate for so long without being caught? Why were his victims mostly young men of color, immigrants, and gay youth, the very people society often ignored? And who was Dahmer really? Was he a born monster or a broken man shaped by neglect, addiction, and silence? In the first days after his arrest, headlines screamed, "Milwaukee Cannibal, monster in apartment 213." But beneath the horror lay another story. A lonely boy grew into one of history's most notorious serial killers, while the warning signs went unseen. This is what makes the Jeffrey Dahmer case unforgettable. It is not only about murder. It is about what happens when society looks away. It is about how prejudice leaves entire communities unprotected. It is about how a man like Dahmer can hide in plain sight. Do not look away, because the truth behind Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes will shock you. It will force you to ask yourself, how well do you really know the people living right next to you? Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in West Allis, Wisconsin. From the outside, his family looked like any other American middle-class household. His father, Lionel, was a chemist who worked long hours in laboratories and classrooms. His mother, Joyce, lived under constant strain, struggling with anxiety and depression, often relying on medication to hold herself together. The house seemed stable, but inside it was fragile and tense. From an early age, Jeffrey was different. He was quiet and withdrawn, spending hours sitting alone. Neighbors later remembered a blond boy who often sat still, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if the world around him did not matter. His fascination with animals grew in disturbing ways. While other children played with dogs and cats, Jeffrey collected roadkill, carried the bodies home, and dissected them in the backyard. Lionel saw this as scientific curiosity, even teaching him how to clean bones. Joyce, however, felt a deep sense of fear. Arguments filled the household. The sound of shouting, crying, and doors slamming became a daily background. Jeffrey withdrew even further. At school, he drifted into isolation, rarely speaking and never forming close friendships. At parties and gatherings, he stood on the sidelines, eyes vacant, as though his mind was far away. By 13, he had already turned to alcohol. Classmates remembered him sneaking liquor into class, hidden inside a thermos, drinking in the middle of lessons. They called him a drunk, but no one took it seriously. On the surface, Jeffrey still managed to appear ordinary. He joined the tennis team. He played in the school band. His yearbook photos showed a handsome boy with a faint smile. To the outside world, he looked harmless. Yet behind that smile grew an obsession with control, a fear of abandonment, and a dark loneliness that would soon consume him. In 1978, Jeffrey graduated from high school. His senior photo captured him like any other young man ready to begin adulthood. But within weeks, he committed his first murder. The victim was Stephen Hicks, a teenager his age, whom Jeffrey picked up while driving. They drank beer together at his house. When Hicks tried to leave, he panicked at the thought of being abandoned. He struck him with a barbell, killed him, and later dismembered the body behind his home. No one discovered the crime. Hicks was reported missing, but there was no trace. That single moment opened a door. Inside Jeffrey's mind, the line between fantasy and reality had vanished. What once lived only in imagination had become real. No one around him understood what had happened. Friends remembered a boy who drank too much, sometimes acted strangely. His parents were consumed by their failing marriage. Society dismissed him as another troubled teenager. Yet in silence, Jeffrey Dahmer had crossed the threshold into murder. At the very moment when life should have been filled with new beginnings, darkness had already taken root. His first killing went unnoticed. There was no confession, no evidence, no clue. From that void, a decade of horror would rise. Victims who entered his life afterward never knew they were walking straight into the room of a monster.
After the murder of Stephen Hicks in 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer seemed to go on living like an ordinary young man. No one knew that a body lay hidden in the woods behind his house. He enrolled at Ohio State University, but lasted only one semester. His drinking spiraled out of control and his grades collapsed. His parents were disappointed, but assumed it was only youthful rebellion. In 1979, Lionel Dahmer enrolled his son in the Army, hoping military discipline would fix him. For 2 years, Jeffrey served in West Germany as a medic. Fellow soldiers later recalled constant drinking, erratic behavior, and growing instability. By 1981, he was discharged early. The official reason was alcohol abuse. Back in America, he drifted, stayed with relatives, and was arrested for public drunkenness. This was the period when cracks began to show. Dahmer wanted to function in society, but he drowned in alcohol and isolation. He tried to work, to rebuild his life, to act normal. Each attempt failed. Dark fantasies returned, stronger than before. His need to control and possess another human being became an obsession he could no longer suppress. In 1987, a turning point came. Dahmer met Stephen Toomey, a young man he encountered at a Milwaukee bar. They drank together and returned to a hotel room. The next morning, Dahmer woke up to find Toomey dead beside him. He later claimed he had no memory of killing him. Panic set in, but instead of calling the police, he disposed of the body. This was his second murder, nearly a decade after Hicks, and the true nightmare had returned. After Toomey, the killings escalated. From 1988 to 1991, Dahmer targeted young men, many of them men of color and immigrants, often met in gay bars. The pattern repeated again and again. He lured them back to his apartment. He drugged their drinks. He strangled them in silence. Then he photographed their bodies with a Polaroid camera, capturing death as if it were art. During this time, Dahmer also clashed with the law. In 1988, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy whom he lured to his home. He was convicted and served a short jail term before being released on probation. Families and community leaders raised warnings, but the sentence was light. Within months of release, Dahmer killed again. By now, the cracks in his life had become deep fractures. Dahmer lived between two realities. At the Ambrosia chocolate factory, he worked quietly, blending in as a polite coworker. Neighbors described him as shy and reserved. On the surface, he was just another man living alone in a small apartment. But behind closed doors, he indulged his darkest obsessions. He preserved skulls and bones. He kept bodies close, convinced it was the only way to avoid abandonment. Psychologists would later say Dahmer was a mixture of control obsession, paraphilia, and a desperate fear of loneliness. But in those years, the warning signs went unnoticed. He was dismissed as a troubled man with a drinking problem, nothing more. The question remains, if someone had truly listened then, if someone had looked deeper, could the tragedy have been stopped before it grew into a storm? Could this nightmare have been prevented if someone had listened earlier, when Jeffrey was only a lost drunk, a lonely son with eyes always searching for attention? By the late 1980s, Jeffrey Dahmer had crossed a line he could never return from. After the killing of Stephen Toomey, his urges grew stronger. He no longer tried to resist them. He began hunting deliberately, choosing young men in bars, bus stations, and lonely streets. Milwaukee was a city in decline. Working-class neighborhoods and immigrant communities were left behind. For Dahmer, they became places to find victims with little risk of being noticed. The method was almost always the same. He lured them to apartment 213 with offers of money or promises of photographs. Once the door closed, he slipped drugs into their drinks. He waited as they lost consciousness. Then he strangled them. In that moment, he believed they would never leave him again. The cruelty did not end with death. Dahmer photographed the bodies with a Polaroid camera. He posed them as if turning death into a form of art. Some were dismembered, parts kept in the refrigerator or soaked in acid. He saved skulls. He sometimes kept hearts. Dahmer admitted he dreamed of creating human shrines, monuments made of flesh and bone so that his victims would remain with him forever. By the late 1990s, the nightmare had reached its peak. The small second-floor apartment had become a chamber of horror. Neighbors complained about the stench and the sound of sawing late at night. Dahmer explained it away with stories of spoiled meat or dead tropical fish. People believed him. Some even thought of him as a quiet, harmless man. One of the most tragic nights came in May 1991. The victim was Konerak Sinthasaphone, a 14-year-old boy from Laos. Dahmer drugged him. Konerak stumbled into the hallway, naked and terrified. Two women called the police, but when officers arrived, Dahmer was calm and convincing. He told them the boy was his lover who had simply drunk too much. The officers believed him. They escorted Konerak back into the apartment. Hours later, the boy was dead. This failure became one of the most haunting examples of neglect and prejudice in modern policing. In the months that followed, more victims vanished. Each had a name and a life. Errol Lindsay, 19 years old, dreamed of opening a barbershop. Tony Hughes, 31 years old, deaf since birth, had fought hard to live independently. Oliver Lacey, 23 years old, a promising athlete with a young family. All of them stepped into apartment 213. None of them came back.
On July 22, 1991, police arrested Jeffrey Dahmer inside apartment 213. From that moment, one of the most shocking criminal cases of the 20th century began to unfold. Investigators documented everything they found, from skulls in the refrigerator to Polaroid photographs spread across the table. The images were so disturbing that some officers had to leave the room. News spread quickly. Headlines called him the Milwaukee Cannibal, the monster of apartment 213. In the days that followed, Dahmer confessed with chilling calm. He described each murder in detail, speaking without emotion, as though recounting routine tasks. The lack of feeling in his voice horrified even the most experienced detectives. His trial opened on January 30th, 1992, and lasted until February 17th. The prosecution presented evidence of 17 murders Dahmer had admitted to. Photographs of the apartment, the preserved remains, and the Polaroids left no doubt about the horror. The courtroom was packed with journalists, families of the victims, and citizens who wanted to see the killer face justice. The defense did not deny the killings. Instead, they argued that Dahmer was insane, driven by uncontrollable obsessions and mental illness. They claimed he needed treatment, not punishment. The prosecution countered that he knew exactly what he was doing. The way he hid bodies, deceived police, and planned his actions proved full awareness. Families of the victims took the stand one by one. Their grief filled the courtroom. Some screamed in anger, calling Dahmer a monster. Others wept and begged for justice. These moments of raw pain shook the entire nation. When the verdict came, Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, a total of 957 years. Wisconsin had abolished the death penalty, so life without parole was the harshest punishment possible. Dahmer showed almost no reaction. He nodded slightly, as if accepting a fate already sealed. Public opinion remained divided. Many believed Dahmer was pure evil, a man who deserved no mercy. Others argued he was a product of neglect and indifference, that warning signs had been ignored for years. Psychologists, lawyers, and reporters debated whether he was insane or simply cold and calculating. Then came a revelation that cut even deeper. In prison, Dahmer admitted he had never felt true happiness except when he was with the bodies of his victims. That confession tore open wounds for the families. It revealed the depth of his sickness and how completely society had failed to intervene. After the trial, the Oxford apartments were demolished. The people of Milwaukee did not want the building to stand as a permanent scar. Families of the victims were left with grief that would never heal. Minority communities spoke out loudly,
pointing to prejudice and neglect. They asked why the cries of the poor, the gay, and people of color had been ignored for so long. The trial of Jeffrey Dahmer was more than the end of a killer. It exposed the cracks in justice itself. It forced America to ask a painful question. How could a monster live in plain sight for so many years without anyone stopping him? As the courtroom applauded the verdict, sorrow lingered. Justice was served, but its price was 17 lives and families who lost their hope forever. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's life ended inside a prison in Portage, Wisconsin. He was beaten to death with a metal bar by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver while doing morning work detail. Death came suddenly and brutally, closing the life of one of America's most notorious serial killers. But his death did not erase the larger question. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer? A monster born in darkness, or a twisted product of neglect and indifference? In the days after, many felt relief. Newspapers called it a final punishment. Families of the victims said they could finally rest a little easier. Others felt disappointment. They wanted Dahmer to live, to face his crimes day after day inside a cell, to suffer the weight of what he had done. What still haunts is not only the killings, it is the way Dahmer lived unnoticed. He worked at a chocolate factory, greeted neighbors, and spoke politely. Only when the apartment door closed did he reveal the monster inside. That contrast terrifies people even now. If Dahmer could hide in plain sight, how many others could be living next door? The case left bitter lessons. It exposed injustice faced by marginalized communities. Most of Dahmer's victims were men of color, immigrants, or gay youth. Prejudice made them vulnerable, their disappearances too easy to dismiss. Even when there was a chance to save a life, as with Konerak's synthesophone, police failed because of bias. America was forced to confront the painful truth that not all citizens are protected equally. Psychologists studied Dahmer for years. Some argued he suffered from severe personality disorders and paraphilic obsessions. Others insisted he was fully aware, making deliberate choices to follow the darkest path. To this day, the debate remains unresolved. What is certain is this: behind the files and crime scene photos were real lives. Young men with dreams and futures. Sons, brothers, friends, and lovers. Their lives were cut short not by fate, but by a man who could have been stopped if warnings had been taken seriously. When people hear the name Jeffrey Dahmer, they often imagine the horrors inside apartment 213. But perhaps what we must remember most are the victims. The laughter silenced too soon. The dreams never realized. The chances to protect them that were missed. The final question is for you. Who was Jeffrey Dahmer in your eyes? A cold-blooded monster, or a warning that any society can create men like him if it refuses to listen, to protect, and to care? If you want to learn about another family tragedy that shook America, watch the next video right here.